to keep in mind if any of you want to go buy some expensive seals. Another chart, the lower right there, it's again not very, there's not a high correlation there, but that shows the level of techness when it comes to attack time or defeat time. Now, the level of techness is pretty subjective, admittedly, but you see that there's no correlation. If you believe that there is a correlation and you want to use the slope of the line here, if you increase by one technology level, you increase attack time by about 170 milliseconds. One thing to note about the more complicated, high-end, high-tech seals is that it's more complicated, which means there are more avenues to go after as potential bad guy or hacker. So those usually fail epically compared to the adhesive label, which fail just by coming up without damaging themselves. Again, like Roger said, we're going to apologize. We're not going to show specific attacks on specific products. It's just sort of the name of the game. However, we can talk about general attacks. One of the #1 ways to attack a seal is you pick it open. You can do this just with your fingers. You can do this with tools or solvents out there. A lot of different ways to do it. You might use shims. We've been known to use fishing line. Anything that works is fair game. Counterfeiting often works. If you actually destroy the seal that you're trying to get into, you just go find other seal parts that they've thrown away and use those to, so this goes back to chain of custody. When you get done using a seal, you don't just toss it in the dumpster. Somebody dumpster dives and now they have parts. Repairing a seal usually leaves some sort of damage. It's usually damaged after you break in and get what you're going after. So oftentimes we'll just repair the damage we've done. For example, we might drill a hole, which we can then pick our way in. And then we just reseal the hole later. So there are a lot of different attacks here. There's a citation. You can get more information on these various attacks. Electronic seals. My personal favorite attack on electronic seals is the man in the middle. Now, somebody over here was talking about JTAG a second ago, and that sort of, to me, that means getting into the firmware and doing all that cool high. Well, you know, you don't really need to get that technical on any of this stuff, actually. Hijacking the display is a subset of a man-in-the-middle attack. So let's say you've got an electronic reader, which is reading some unique signature from the seal, and you've got an inspector looking at this reader. He's going to believe whatever the display tells him. So if you hijack the display, if you intercept the communication stream between the microcontroller and the display, you can now filter what's being shown on the display. If the microcontroller says alarm, alarm, and you filter that out and say okay, okay, the inspector has no choice but to believe that seal. So anyway, that's a very low-tech, you don't need to understand firmware, you don't need to reverse anything, you don't need to go, you know, totally crazy. A lot of other different electronic attacks out there, but you can, you know, cool the power crystals, or I'm sorry, you can cool the quartz crystals to slow the clock down. You can attach, you can glitch attack the power line. There are all kinds of things you can do.
Well, one of the key points in any kind of security device, but particularly with seals, is that manufacturers and vendors claim often they have a unique manufacturing process that no one else can match. In our experience, that's usually not true, but it doesn't really matter, because what's often overlooked is an adversary doesn't really have to counterfeit a device. She's just got to make it look sort of like the original device and maybe have some kind of the performance features of the device. That's much easier than true counterfeiting. The average person is familiar with seals in the context of tamper-evident packaging required by law in the United States on all over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. Been remarkably little study on tamper-evident packaging. The FDA must approve it all, but doesn't really have any standards or guidelines or any explanation of how they approve or don't approve. So we did a little experiment. We went to the 7th Security Seals Symposium, and we had 71 tamper detection experts look at some products that had been tampered with. The work was done by a college student, Sonia Trujillo, which is a computer science major. And she basically attacked some and not others food and over-the-counter pharmaceutical products. And the results, as you might suspect at this point, was the tamper detection experts were no better than random guessing at which packages or containers had been tampered with. So the obvious question is, if experts can't tell, what possibilities does the average consumer have? And indeed, tamper-evident packaging is not about effective tamper detection. It's about reducing jury awards when inevitably there is product tampering. We're often asked about seal sport, a little bit like lock sport. Would this be a fun hobby? And in one sense, I wouldn't want to discourage that because I think it would highlight how bad seals really are, and in particular, how bad the average seal use protocol is. But frankly, right now, it's too easy. I don't see that it's that interesting a hobby. And the more important point is, what inspection protocol are you testing against? We can take even a very modest seal, and if you're willing to do enough work, do fairly reliable tamper detection. The problem is no one's willing to do that much work. So unlike a lock sport, where you just attack the hardware and it's either open or not, this is a much more complex problem. Well, the good news is most of the seal attacks that at least we've developed really have pretty simple and inexpensive countermeasures. But the deal is the seal installers and inspectors have to understand really what they're doing. They have to have seen examples of attacks on the specific seal for the specific application, for the specific vulnerabilities they have in mind. This is lots of hands-on training. Almost nobody, including for nuclear safeguards, wants to do this much work. On the other hand, we think that there are better seals are possible. So the question is, what's wrong with current seals? Well, with a conventional seal, you can detect the seal being opened or the tampering or the intrusion, but what do you do with that information? In a conventional seal, you store it in or on the seal, the fact that there's been tampering or unauthorized access, maybe just from the seal being damaged. Well, we'd like to turn that around, and with an anti-evidence seal, when we first install the seal, we're going to store information in or on the seal. The tampering has not yet been detected. Then when it is, that gets immediately erased. Now there's nothing for the adversary to counterfeit. They can counterfeit the hardware, but if they don't know the correct anti-evidence information to put in or on the seal, they can't hide the fact that tampering has occurred. And indeed, we've developed, well, almost 24 different kinds of anti-evidence seals. They have a lot of interesting attributes. We think better security. They can sometimes go inside a container rather than having to be on the outside. They're typically 100% reusable. And they have something called an anti-gun decking feature. Gun decking is an old Navy term from the 18th century. When you were in the British Navy, if you wanted to shirk your duties, you'd go hide out on the gun deck, because unless a battle was underway, it was pretty quiet there. One of the problems with seals is the seal inspector, whether viewing the seal manually or with an automated reader, claims to have inspected the seal, but really didn't. Well, if you require them to report back the anti-evidence information, which they can do through non-secure communications channels, because the bad guy can only be a nuisance, he can't substitute in information to hide the fact that tampering has occurred. If you require this report in, the act of obtaining the anti-evidence is effectively the same as checking the seal. And there's an interesting possibility here, which makes most sense for international nuclear safeguards, namely treaty monitoring, where you can actually have the bad guys inspect the seal for you without the inspectors being present to demonstrate that there's been no tampering with the items that may have been dismantled or put in storage. I'll show you one anti-evidence seal here called the talking truck cargo seal. We developed this for a fictitious trucking company called Near Miss Trucking. Originally it was Acme Trucking, but it turns out there really isn't Acme Trucking, and we didn't want to get in trouble with them. Basically, the idea is that there's 125 slogans well known by employees of Near Miss Trucking. They're sick of these slogans. I've heard them so many times. They're not secret. But what is secret is the one slogan that's been chosen for this particular shipment. And here's just an example of some of the slogans. So the idea is when the truck reaches its destination, we're going to simply communicate with a radio frequency short-range device. It's going to provide a password, because this is a password anti-evidence seal, that says, I'm the good guy, it's perfectly okay to tell me the anti-evidence. And the anti-evidence in this case is a spoken slogan. So if the guys on the loading dock or the receiving dock hear the correct slogan, there's been no tampering. If they hear nothing or a different slogan, we like to feed the wrong slogan if there's been tampering, so the bad guys aren't tipped off that they've been detected. Then they'll know that there's been some kind of tampering. So we'll go ahead and demonstrate this seal.
So here's the seal itself. If it looks kludged up, that's, well, because it is. We have a light sensor on it. Traditionally, we hate light sensors. They're very easy to beat, but they make for good demos because people understand them. Light sensors, well, yeah, they're just very easy to beat. So anyway, we're just going to turn this thing on. Now here's an example of an electronic reader.
ERMS Trucking Proprietary Security System, developed by Argonne National Laboratories Vulnerability Assessment Team, ready for programming.
Sorry about the intro, but we gotta.
I should say it's my voice because my students always said I'd like to hear myself talk.
Your hometown truckers. Your hometown truckers. Now monitoring.
Okay, so the slogan chosen for this period is your hometown truckers. This thing could be sitting in a warehouse, might be in shipment, who knows. When it gets inspected, you inquire, and if it hasn't been tampered with, you hope to hear the same slogan.
Tamper Inquiry 1. Your hometown truckers. Your hometown truckers. Your hometown truckers.
Now, if you've got some sort of adversary that gets in your container and doesn't know how to work in the dark, and they trip the light sensor, you come back in inspection time and you inquire, you hope to hear, or you should hear a different slogan.
Tamper Inquiry 2. Your cargo is safe. Your cargo is safe.
So why do we do a different slogan? Well, we don't want to tip our hand that you've been caught. If they can go to the microprocessor, which is pretty easy because it's sitting right here, especially on this model, they can see that, well, a byte's there or not there. In this case, we just swap out a different byte and you're none the wiser. So the original byte's gone completely, new byte's been inserted.
The key point is once tampering or intrusion is detected, the information needed to generate the correct slogan is instantly erased within less than a microsecond, so that information is gone. Now the adversary can counterfeit the hardware, but without knowing what the right slogan was, they basically have a problem.
So this is assuming that they don't know that you have this piece of hardware and how to reach the slogan.
Yeah, the question was whether the adversary knows about whether you have this piece of hardware and how to access the slogan. There essentially is a password, and the electronics are looking for an attempt to hack in or a physical intrusion into the actual microprocessor. So the hope is that the sensors that are associated with the device itself, including the seal, would detect any attempt to go in and try to get the slogan. But certainly if anyone can break in and get the slogan, then there's a problem. The slogan itself is not stored in the reader, but is actually stored in the seal. Yeah, one more question. You potentially could, but without the password, the seal refuses to respond. It's random. So, and you don't know the correct slogan, so you would.
Roger? Roger. Yes, you could, but the slogan that's chosen is supposed to be a secret. And if you're the bad guy, you don't hopefully know what that secret slogan was that was chosen for the...
In your own list of how to crack a seal, you said inside man. I got an inside man, I've got the secret.
Yeah,
That's true. If you've got the
inside man would compromise, absolutely. An insider threat compromises any security device.
If I say I'm going to have a reader, I can't tamper with it. I keep opening the door where I eventually just get back to the right one.
Well,
It's random, but
right.
if I can roll the dice enough, I get it correct.
Well, essentially, this is designed for a one-time opening. Now, you can program in, sometimes cargo stops several different places, but typically, the typical scenario is a company shipping from here to there, and it just should never be opened. So you're not typically going to be allowed multiple openings, but it's a good question.
Didn't your identifier also give an universal sequence as to when the inquiry occurred? At the first, it was, first inquiry, second inquiry. So if you'd done it multiple times, then you would know it.
Well, the question is about the initial, when you hear the first slogan, that's of course done at secure shipping locations. The adversary is hopefully not present. Now, if he intercepts the slogan at your shipping department. Oh, absolutely. Right. Essentially, no technology takes away the problem of the inside.